Hey guys, my name is Tensor. Welcome to another Flutter tutorial video. Today we're going to be talking about some of the different user interface elements inside of Flutter. Now keep in mind that there are quite literally hundreds of different user interface widgets that you can use from Flutter, so there is absolutely no way that I can cover all of them. But I will be covering some of the more common ones, such as the grid layout, tabs, and the stepper. We have a basic application that was generated using Visual Studio Code. Inside of the My App class, I've just created the build function and I've added the material app widget into it. A grid view in Flutter is a scrollable 2D array of widgets. It's sort of like if you took a list view and you gave it multiple different columns. And of course, like a list view, we can have it scroll in a vertical manner or a horizontal manner. We'll create a function to generate the various cards that we're going to put inside of our grid view. And this function will take in the card name and then the icon that we want to pass to the card. Our card will have an elevation of 1.0, and then inside of the card we'll give it a column. We want to define the cross-axis alignment, and we'll give it cross-axis alignment stretch. And we also want to define the main axis size, and we'll give our main axis a size of min. The main axis size property is how much size the main axis should occupy. With the minimum size, we are sort of just scrunching it down quite a bit. Then we want to tell each of these cards that they need to have a vertical direction of down. You can make it up, and then you'd flip the card upside down. Inside of our column, we'll have two children. First, we'll have a center item that will have an icon, and that icon will take in the icon data that we're passing into this function, and then we'll have the text below it, which will take in the name that we're passing into this function. So each card will have an icon at the top, and then it will have text below it. Now we'll create a function called build that will produce our grid view for this particular application. To create our grid view, we're going to use GridView.count. Then we set the property primary to true. This primary Boolean value tells the view whether or not it should use the primary color to paint itself. Then we'll give our grid view some padding, so we'll add edgeinsets.all 1.0. And then we want to set up a bunch of other things to help the spacing. So we'll set up the cross-axis count, and because we just want to have two columns, we're going to make it 2. Then we're going to set up the aspect ratio, so the cards will be of 1.0 size. We could make them smaller or larger if we wanted to. Then we'll make the main axis spacing 1.0 and the cross-axis spacing 1.0. And then we'll add our children. The children, of course, are a list of widgets. And all we have to do is call our makeGridCell function from up here to make a card to fit in as a widget. We'll fill out our grid view by making 6 different cards. We'll have a home card, an email card, a chat card, a news card, a network card, and an options card. Alright, so here is our grid view, and I've modified this slightly. I added center for the text as well because it was pushed off to the left, and I also put this inside of a scaffold. So we have our material app, and then we put in our scaffold, and then for our body we put in the gridview.build. This builds out 2 columns, and if we had more than 6 elements we could scroll up and down. Let's just copy the 6 elements here and paste them again, and then we'll reload the app, and now you can see that we can scroll up and down. Now these grid view cards can also have on-click elements, so we can use these to navigate around our application if we wanted to, and we could add multiple elements to sort of manipulate this type of layout. Alright, so now that we have our grid view all set up, let's start talking about tabs. And first I'll just remove the other 6 elements so this goes back to normal, and now we can implement some tabs. Okay, so now to talk about tabs, I'm just going to change this application slightly. So we're going to change My App to extend stateful widget rather than stateless widget, because our tab application is actually going to have state inside of it. Then we want to, of course, create the class to handle our state. We create a class called MyAppState, and this will extend state with MyApp inside of it. And we also want to give this a mixin so that it will be able to handle animations. And the mixin that we're going to use is this single ticker provider state mixin. Then we need to create a tab controller. The tab controller is the part of the application that's responsible for which view is being shown at which given time. Tabs are essentially just like routing in that they allow us to navigate around our application. We need to override the init state function. And of course, we're going to call super init state in here, and then we're going to set up our tab controller. We only want 2 tabs, so we're going to put in the length of 2, and then we're going to add the vsync for it. We also want to override the dispose function. This is so that it will properly dispose of the controller when this widget goes out of the widget tree. To do this, all we have to do is call tabController.dispose, and then we can just call superDispose after that. Now let's create a function that will create our tab bar. And the tab bar widget has a property called tabs. This tabs property will be a list of tab type. Inside of our tab bar, we'll put in 2 tabs. One will be for home, and the other one will be for settings power. You could put text, you could put even children in here, so if you wanted to have like a row or even a bunch of different elements, you could do this as well. I'm just going to put in icons because I think that that is just the easiest way to sort of think about this type of component. We also want to add the controller for this particular tab bar. So we create the controller property and then we fill it out with our tab controller. To further wire this up, we need to create our tab bar view function, and this just takes in the tabs as its children and the controller. So basically we're just connecting our tab bar to our tab bar view so that it knows which view to look at based on the tab that has been clicked. Alright, so now we can override the build function for this class, and we can use this build function to generate our main application's body. Like before, we'll take a material app and then in the home we'll embed a scaffold. For this time we want to give this particular scaffold an app bar because we want to put our tabs inside of the app bar. So first we want to create a background color for our app bar. I'm just going to make it red, and then we will specify in the bottom property to call our make tab bar function, which will then put the 2 tabs into the bottom of this app bar. We want to specify the tabs that we're passing into our make tab bar view function inside of the body of our scaffold. So first I'm going to pass in the GridView build function. So the first tab will point towards our grid view, and then I just want to make a simple widget that we can use for our second tab. I'll just create a new class called simple widget, and I'll extend our stateless widget, and then this will have a simple build function inside of it which will create a center and give us some text that will say these are the settings. So here's our application. We have our grid view, and you can see this has our home, email, chat, news, network, and options items still. And then if we click here, it will then send us to a small view that will just have a bunch of text that says these are the settings. And we can also slide back and forth if we wanted to, rather than just clicking on the tabs. So again, this is a bit like how we created our routes in the other tutorial. However, this is a little bit more integrated with the application, and it makes the application feel more seamless compared to just opening up new pages. Before we move on to the next UI element, let's just talk about the tab controller. So this tab controller is what tells the tabs which tab view it should be showing. When we're looking at the home view, it should be showing our first view, which is our grid view build function. And then when we click this second tab, it should be showing our simple widget view. The tab controller is what's responsible for assigning that behavior to the tabs. Okay, so now let's talk about steppers. A stepper is a widget that will allow us to display progress through a sequence of steps, and they're particularly useful in sign-up forms and registration forms where you have a series of steps that you need to complete to get to the end, or where you have multiple steps that need to be completed in order to submit the entire form. Let's put our stepper inside of our simple widget class. This needs to have state, and so we'll just create our simple widget state class, and we'll change this to stateful widget, and then of course we'll make the create state function. And naturally we need to override this function as well. And then we can take our build function and put it inside of our simple widget state class. We do, however, want to create some global variables for this class. So we'll create an integer called step counter. This should be in camel case. and we'll set it equal to 0 by default. Then we want to create a list of step elements, and we'll call this steps. Each of our steps needs to have a title, a content, and then an isActive property. And the content can be any widget. Normally you would put in like text box and things like that, and maybe even a button to submit the step itself. The isActive property is just determining whether or not the step is an active step. And I'll create 4 steps, so they're just basically copies of the first step. I just say this is the first, second, third, or fourth step, and all of them are active. Alright, so now let's go into our build function, and we'll have this return a container, and inside of this container we'll have our new stepper. The stepper being the widget that brings together all of our steps. We need to define the current step, or rather the initial step, and this will be set to our step counter, which we set to 0 above. Then we also want to embed our steps into our stepper, and of course because we created a list called steps, we're just going to call that list in our property called steps. Then we want to specify the type of stepper that we want to use. I want ours to be vertical, but it could also be horizontal, and we'll look at that after we're finished. Our stepper has 3 inbuilt functions to manage the state of this widget. So we have one called onStep tap, and this is the action that is performed when a step is actually tapped by the user. We'll just use an anonymous function that takes in the step itself, and then we'll call setState, and then we'll take our step counter and we'll set it equal to the step that's being passed through. When somebody clicks on a step, it'll actually move over to that step. Then on step cancel, we want the steps to essentially iterate backwards. We'll use the ternary operation. We'll check to see if our step counter is greater than 0, and if it is, then we want to decrement our step counter by 1. Otherwise, we want to set our step counter to 0. And for our step continue function, we'll call the setState function, and we'll check to see if our step counter is less than our steps.length minus 1. And if it is, then we'll increment our step counter by 1. Otherwise, we'll set our step counter equal to 0. Okay, so that's it for our stepper. Now let's run our application and take a look at this particular widget. Here's our application. We have our grid view, we have our tabs, and if we hit the second tab, this brings us to our stepper. And you can see now we have our individual steps. We have step 1, and we have a button that says continue or cancel, and this says this is the first step. And if we hit continue, it'll move on to step 2. If we hit continue, it'll move on to step 3. And if we hit continue again, it'll move on to step 4. If we hit continue after step 4, it'll just go back to step 1. The same goes for hitting cancel. So if we hit step 2 and then we hit cancel, it'll go back to step 1. Also, we can choose the step that we want to pick. If I click on 2 or 3, it will automatically move to that step. So you can see how this would be advantageous to use for some kind of form or something where you need to have a sequence of events occur inside of your application. So now I've changed the state for step 3 to stepState.editing, and you can see that the icon changes to a pencil. We can also make our stepper horizontal, but you'll see here now it's actually overflowing on the screen. So I kind of like the vertical type for this particular layout. Alright guys, so that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you enjoyed this tutorial, feel free to like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the box below. And if you dislike this tutorial, then by all means, downvote it as much as you like. Have a good day.